I think the 5 year horizon is a good question because I moved from the US to Singapore about 5 years back. And when I looked at the adoption of open source in India 5 years back, I was a little bit surprised to see that it was not where the rest of the world was. Even if I take economies in Asia Pacific like Japan and Australia, they were further along the road at that point in time compared to where India was. And I think over the last 5 years that picture has changed quite dramatically. And I think about three huge factors that have contributed in this. I think the first part is the fact that the skills was definitely an issue. It was a chicken and egg kind of situation at times where the industry, from a customer perspective, felt the skills was not there. The people who were building the skills, I think they couldn't figure out where the opportunities were. So that was definitely a challenge. The second challenge that I think I saw in 2007, 2008 was that there was a lot of local ISV players who had not yet jumped on the open source bandwagon back then, right? So when customers are deploying applications in the financial industry, for example, not everything was from the global pool of software developers. There was a lot of locally grown software solutions in the FSI and telco spaces which were not available on Red Hat platforms. And so I think that definitely did inhibit the ability for people to adopt open source. And so I think that is again a fairly critical factor. The third part was India is also a very ecosystem and channel-driven market, right? The SIs have a huge role to play. The next tier of channel partners, I think, also have a fairly large role to play in terms of helping customers make decisions. And I think the ecosystem back then probably was not where it needed to be. So fast forward 5 years, right? Where are we today? I think from a skills perspective, I don't think there's an iota of doubt in terms of availability of skills in the marketplace. I know customers can easily find the right skills for most of the open source technologies that we today bring to market. When I look at the ISV ecosystem, we've invested quite heavily in that ecosystem. So across a cross-section of verticals and horizontal spaces, ISVs today have their applications and their solutions ported on the Red Hat platform, right? Which makes it very easy for customers to deploy those solutions. So that's definitely there. And the last part is the ecosystem. We've been working on this for quite some time. Like one of my additional responsibilities is also I'm responsible for the global business of the Indian SIs. The Switch partners, or I think they call them Twitch these days, right? For the Satyam and Tech Mahindra merger. So we built that capability with these SIs now over the last 5 years and even the second tier of the channel partner ecosystem. So the ecosystem is there now ready to take that message to the marketplace. So I think in that context, I would say the adoption has accelerated significantly, but it's happened more in the last 18 months, I would say, than consistently over the last 5 years. So I could actually reach to the far right and say just about everything new. Any new innovation you've seen in technology in the last 5 years has probably had its root in open source, right? So when you think about big data, the first name that comes to everybody's lips is Hadoop, right? What is Hadoop? An open source project from Apache. If you were to think about the largest revolution in the mobility industry, it's probably the Android, right? What is Android? An open source platform. If you think about what has happened from a perspective of the explosion of the web in the last 5 years, right? If you look at companies like Google, Yahoo, eBay, and what they've brought to the market, the core of everything that they do is built on open source. So when you talk about innovation, I would actually put it the other way around. I would say that crux of innovation that's happened in the technology space, specifically in the software space, has almost exclusively happened in the open source domain. When you think about cloud today, right, which is the future of how technology will be built and consumed, right? Almost all cloud technologies, right, at its very nascent level, have its roots back in open source from an innovation standpoint. So I think innovation is very rich. Innovation is quite sound. It really depends on the areas that interest you. So if you think about Red Hat's innovation in the last 18 months, obviously we've invested a lot in the cloud. We firmly believe that the open hybrid cloud is the way to go. And if you think about where we are today, from an OpenStack community standpoint, 18 months back, I would say, somewhere in that vicinity, we started investing heavily. And we've gone in the last 18 months from, we are a small part of that community to being the leading code contributor to the entire OpenStack community, right? And if you're following the news on the on the cloud globally, OpenStack is fast emerging as the largest, most scalable platform for building infrastructure as a service in the cloud, right? And so if you think about it from a Red Hat standpoint, right, our engineers, our engineering folks from all over the world, right, some of them even in India, are now making significant contributions, innovations to OpenStack, right? We are on the board of OpenStack. We're working with vendors and partners from every aspect of the technology community to make sure that the innovation in OpenStack continues to stay at the pace at which it is, right? So that's a classical example where we are helping drive and lead innovation. Open source has been mainstream for a very long time. It takes different I guess time factors for it to reach a state of maturity in different markets, right? Like I explained, by the time I came to Singapore in 2007, open source was already mainstream in brick and mortar companies in the US and Western Europe, but it was still fairly new technology in a market like India. It was somewhere halfway through maturity in markets like Japan and Australia. But I think what most people have realized is open source is here to stay. So I think everybody has realized that it is something that they have to coexist with. So a lot of these guys have jumped on the open source bandwagon, and it's something we welcome because we've always said, right, it's all about an open platform. It's all about interoperability. The customer has that choice. So I think the answer is very clear. I think open source is at the end of the day, like I said, a means to an end, right? I think it's probably the most sophisticated and innovative platform from a software development perspective. I think the subscription model that Red Hat has proved time and over again, right, that it's probably one of the best ways in which customers can consume that and manage it. The beauty about open source is that it has absolutely the opposite of what you just talked about. Open source is all about meritocracy, right? Who you are has no relevance to the quality of code that you deliver. So if you're able to come up with innovation that is absolutely path-breaking, you don't have to have large corporate backing. You don't have to have anybody behind you. I think you will be very, very successful, right? If I take the example of Android, it's a very fair point you made. Android was created by Google, right? But if you take some of the projects, like take Hadoop as an example, right? Hadoop was started as an Apache project, right? Yes, there was probably Yahoo was investing in it because they had a big data problem that they were trying to solve. But the beauty that we see here is that the innovation that happens in open source happens from a customer standpoint, right? It's not a vendor-driven innovation. A lot of the latest innovations you're seeing, where did OpenStack come from? OpenStack came from Rackspace, right? And Rackspace created that project, from what I understand, right? And again, I'm talking on third-person account because they wanted to solve a problem that they were having in terms of how they wanted to build and deploy a large-scale cloud, right? Hadoop happened because Yahoo had a problem with large data. So the beauty here is that a lot of these innovations are driven by customers, right? Not vendors. Very rarely do you see vendors bringing a lot of these innovations to the table. So I think in that sense, right, while the name is important, the beauty is it's the customer's name behind it, right? If you look at our own example, we had a co-innovation that we did with NASA, right? Sorry, with the NSA, National Security Agency. Where did SE Linux come from? SE Linux came from the National Security Agency that said they needed a secure Linux that they could deploy efficiently. They said, we're not in the business of building Linux distributions. Red Hat, you guys are in that business. Here's our idea. Can you go now make a commercial product out of this, right? So the customer came out of that. We collaborated with JP Morgan to come out with the asynchronous message queuing protocol, right? They had a genuine need, right, in their environment to build a platform that could work with asynchronous messaging. So they built something, but then they again figured out that they're a bank, right? The IT shop in the bank is there to support the bank's business, not to create asynchronous messaging protocols. So they came to us and said, guys, can you create a community around this? And can we build innovation that then we as a customer can come back and consume? That is the beauty of this model, right? That the names that come are typically the customer names, which is why the adoption immediately skyrockets, because it's not coming from a vendor. It's not coming from somebody who's talking about a theoretical requirement. Most of these innovations are being driven by customers themselves. How often do you see that in the proprietary world, right? That's the beauty again, which is why I said the way software is developed and consumed is so much better in the open source world than in the traditional way in which software has been developed. one interesting thing about India, which is mind-blowing for us, is that India has the largest pool of Red Hat certified engineers. I think you probably have heard this before in discussions you've had with us. Uh, Literally, we stand out. We are number one in the world when it comes to the number of certified engineers that exist anywhere on the planet, right? And where does it start from? Not everything is happening in the world of mature professionals and enterprises. It's actually starting in grassroots in colleges, right? Virtually every engineering college today, not just engineering colleges, but any college that is teaching science degrees has Linux as part of their curriculum. Open source is already embedded at the very, very basic grassroots level. I even heard there are some schools that teach Linux. I sometimes struggle with the fact that a 12th standard, or 10th or 11th standard or 12th standard student is learning Linux, but engineering colleges for sure, right? And so what happens is when these guys go through their courses in college and they're learning about open source, they're learning about Linux, they're learning about Java. When they come out, we see a massive demand for these guys to get certified on the Red Hat platform, right? India is a skills base that gets exported globally, right? So when I talk about 10,000 odd Red Hat certified engineers, these guys are not just getting consumed or not getting subsumed into the industry here in India. They're being exported globally to all parts of the world, right? So from that perspective, obviously, we have enabled that whole, I would say, secondary, tertiary, and grassroots level education and training system to make sure that we are penetrating down there. Obviously, we are seeing customers adopt open source in a much more, faster pace than what we've seen in the prior years. So obviously, our business growth has closely tracked that. I think if you look at the major verticals, globally, carrier media entertainment is our number one. I think was the number one vertical for the last quarter, and then we have FSI, telco, and government, which are the next three big ones. I think in India we have a very similar kind of I would say distribution. Obviously, the verticals do swap in and out depending on any particular quarter, but by and large, I think that's a good trend to see. We've seen very good growth in all of these segments. I think in spite of us walking into an election year, we've seen good uptake in the government space. We've seen obviously the biggest growth in the financial services industry space. In terms of key focus areas for us and where we see the next wave of growth coming, clearly middleware will be the biggest area of growth for us. I think customers have reached a point where I think they're not cool anymore to pay the kind of expensive premiums for what I would call quote unquote proprietary middleware solutions. And I think a lot of them have dabbled with JBoss over the last 12-18 months. They've kicked the tires in projects which were probably not mission critical. They've seen the kind of explosive performance they can get, absolutely mind-boggling return of investment and TCO compared to the proprietary middleware solutions, and they've seen that it's rock stable and the thing actually works in very hardcore mission critical environments. So we're seeing customers expand their use of middleware, right? And when I say middleware, it's across all verticals. We've seen it in large projects in government, we've seen it in large projects in financial services, we've seen it in the telco environments, we are seeing it in manufacturing. So I think middleware will be a very big part of our growth story. I think cloud and virtualization will automatically be there in the top two. And I think those would be the big growth factors for us.